Today, we're plunging into a decade so vibrant, so contradictory, it practically wrote itself into history. Imagine that iconic image from F. Scott Fitzgerald's Tales of the Jazz Age. The carefree flapper, dancing, music swirling, maybe a bit of illegal champagne. That spirit of exuberance, well, it epitomizes a decade that was anything but simple. Our mission today is to explore the Jazz Age, redefining the nation, 1929. It was a period of just astonishing change, propelled by unprecedented prosperity, dazzling new technologies, and, well, profound social shifts that reshaped American life, often sparking surprising and intense clashes.
Right, and it's crucial to understand that the 1920s was far more than just a party. This was really a crucible where American identity itself was intensely debated. You had traditional values colliding head-on with modern urban life, creating both widespread celebration and significant backlash. Our source material offers such a rich tapestry of these economic, social, political, and cultural transformations. It shows us a nation truly grappling with its future.
Absolutely. Our dive into the era's prosperity, it really begins with the engine driving so much of this change. A booming economy, which, fueled the explosion of popular entertainment. After the hardships of World War I, the United States entered a period of, unprecedented economic growth, generating disposable income that completely transformed how Americans lived and played.
This new prosperity was foundational.
Yeah.
It allowed for advancements in entertainment and technology, fundamentally altering patterns of leisure and consumption. Things like buying on credit or carrying debt, as they sometimes called it, became commonplace, making everything from consumer goods to automobiles accessible to average Americans. And critically, advertising became a central force in this new consumer economy, shaping desires like never before.
And what did Americans do with this newfound money? For many, they flocked to the movies. The rise of these movie palaces was just astonishing. These weren't just theaters, they were opulent cathedrals of entertainment, often seating thousands. And a double feature with a live show cost a mere 25 cents. The sheer scale of moviegoing is almost hard to fathom. Weekly attendance soared to an incredible 90 million people by the end of the decade.
90 million.
People were often going more than once a week.
It really tells us something about the power of this new medium, doesn't it? The decade gave us the first generation of true movie stars. Rudolph Valentino, the heartthrob, Clara Bow, the original It Girl, with her, undeniable appeal. But the biggest box office draw of all was Charlie Chaplin, the Tramp. A global icon, really. Then a monumental shift arrived in 1927 with The Jazz Singer.
Ah, the first talkie.
Exactly, the first talkie, starring Al Jolson. Its narrative of cultural assimilation, coupled with the new sound technology, it just resonated deeply. It's also worth noting that Hollywood emerged as the film industry center. They moved from New York partly to escape Thomas Edison's patent suits, actually, and they were drawn by California's climate and, reliable sunshine, perfect for filming year-round. The movies truly forged a shared national imagination, creating the first mass-produced celebrities and a common cultural language for millions, often reflecting and, shaping the very debates about American identity.
As silver screens lit up the nation, Americans weren't just captivated by moving pictures, they were quite literally on the move themselves. Thanks to the revolutionary impact of the automobile. Henry Ford's Model T didn't just put America on wheels. His perfection of the assembly line drove down the price dramatically, from $850 in 1908 to just $300 by 1924. That made car ownership accessible to the average American.
It's amazing, right? And you could even find used Model Ts for as little as $5.
By 1929, over 23 million automobiles were traversing American roads.
The automobile's impact was just immense. It transformed both the economy and society. It spurred whole new industries like glass, steel, rubber, and oil, fundamentally shifting the nation from a coal-based to a petroleum-driven economy. Governments had to fund massive expansions of public roadways, leading to the emergence of motels, restaurants, and what we now call automobile suburbs.
And Ford's labor practices were pretty interesting too, aren't they?
They were, yeah. He doubled workers' wages to $5 a day and standardized the 8-hour workday, partly to reduce high turnover on the assembly line. And interestingly, he paid white and black workers equally, which was quite progressive for its time. It actually contributed to the great migration of African Americans from the South to northern factories, even as, intense racial segregation and nativism remained prevalent elsewhere. This paradox, it's a powerful insight into the decade's contradictions.
From the ground to the sky. Air travel also soared. It's almost hard to believe that in the mid-1920s, Orville Wright, one of the pioneers of flight, actually declared no flying machine will ever fly from New York to Paris. Yet, just a few years later, in 1927, Charles Lindbergh defied that skepticism, completing his monumental solo transatlantic flight in the Spirit of St. Louis, 33 hours from New York to Paris. It turned him into an international hero, a powerful symbol of individualism and technological triumph. This feat undeniably sparked the growth of the airline industry.
And the spirit of innovation wasn't limited to transportation. It deeply influenced daily life right inside the home. New household appliances like radios, phonographs, vacuum cleaners, washing machines, refrigerators, they just flooded the market.
And these items, they were expensive, but they became accessible to a much larger segment of the population through store credit and installment plans.
Yeah.
Buy now, pay later.
Which raises a critical question. What was the true impact of these so-called labor-saving devices? Ironically, they often seem to increase women's workload by raising the standards of domestic cleanliness. Women found themselves cleaning more frequently, washing more often, cooking more elaborate meals, maybe not gaining as much leisure time as promised. This enduring dream of a relaxed lifestyle was also expertly sold by another booming industry, advertising. While magazines like Ladies' Home Journal and the Saturday Evening Post were filled with colorful print ads.
Right, those classic ads.
The truly innovative new medium for advertisers was radio. It allowed them to reach a broad, passive audience like never before, directly into people's living rooms.
And radio wasn't just for ads. Hundreds of stations rapidly emerged, broadcasting news, serial stories, even political speeches. This widespread adoption of radio dramatically sped up the nationalization and homogenization of American culture, smoothing out regional differences, even with popular, albeit problematic, programs like Amos and Andy.
Yeah, that one definitely relied on racial stereotypes, but it reached listeners from coast to coast. It shows radio's reach.
Absolutely.
Radio also revolutionized the world of sports, bringing play-by-play descriptions directly into millions of homes. This fostered national sports superstars, turning athletes into household names. Think about Babe Ruth, the Sultan of SWAT. He fundamentally changed baseball with his hitting prowess, famously launching 60 home runs in 1927. He became a symbol of the era's larger-than-life individualism and, the immense popularity of sports.
So we've painted this picture of prosperity and pizzazz, lots of energy. Yet beneath this glittering surface, the 1920s were marked by deep divisions, particularly between urban and rural Americans. There was a vigorous defense of traditional values against the relentless tide of rapid social change.
While many middle-class Americans embraced these new leisure and consumption patterns, a significant portion, especially in rural areas, fundamentally disagreed on what constituted a good life. They reacted to the changes of modern urban society with a strong defense of religious values and, frankly, a fearful rejection of cultural diversity.
That fear often manifested as a rise in nativism. Increased immigration, particularly from Southern and Eastern Europe, many of them Catholic, triggered widespread anxiety among those who saw themselves as older stock white Americans. There was a genuine fear of foreign threats after events like anarchist assassinations, creating this desire to prioritize those with older family trees over more recent immigrants.
And this undercurrent of fear and suspicion, well, it culminated in the infamous Sacco and Vanzetti trial. These were Italian immigrants, anarchists, accused of robbery and murder in Massachusetts in 1920. Despite a lack of direct evidence, their radical political views were heavily emphasized at trial, leading to their conviction and execution in 1927. The trial deeply divided the nation along nativist immigrant lines, sparking global protests and drawing powerful critiques, like from Harvard law professor Felix Frankfurter, who condemned the systematic exploitation of the defendants' alien blood. It became a stark symbol of the era's xenophobia.
And in response, legislators passed increasingly restrictive immigration quotas, specifically designed to drastically reduce arrivals from Southern and Eastern Europe. These measures actually garnered support from groups like the Ku Klux Klan and even some labor unions, with President Coolidge famously declaring, "America must be kept American."
Which brings us directly to the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan. Dormant since about 1877, the KKK experienced this massive revival following the popularity of D.W. Griffith's racist 1915 film, The Birth of a Nation.
That film, it presented a completely racist, white-centric view of Reconstruction, didn't it? Falsely depicting the KKK as heroes. President Wilson even reportedly lauded it as like writing history with lightning, which is just, it's chilling.
Yeah.
The second incarnation of the Klan under William Simmons publicly disavowed violence but gained mainstream support. They embraced a platform of Protestantism, anti-Catholicism, anti-Semitism, and calls for stricter immigration. They even attracted women's auxiliaries. By 1924, they boasted a staggering 6 million members, particularly strong in the Midwest. That's huge. However, their influence eventually waned due to anti-masking legislation, public scandals like the Grand Dragon of Indiana's murder conviction, and condemnation from influential figures like Reinhold Niebuhr, Jewish organizations, and the NAACP. Ultimately, the Great Depression delivered the final blow to their organizational power. This urban-rural conflict sharpened even further around issues of faith and science. City life, with its new morality, seemed sinful and profligate to many rural Americans. Nowhere was this more evident than in Tennessee, where the Butler Act made it illegal to teach evolution, directly challenging the story of the divine creation of man as taught in the Bible.
And this set the stage for a dramatic clash of worldviews. The Scopes monkey trial of 1925, it became a national spectacle. The ACLU challenged the Butler Act with teacher John Scopes, and the small town of Dayton, Tennessee, eagerly welcomed the publicity. It pitted fundamentalist champion William Jennings Bryan, a 3-time presidential candidate.
Bryan, yeah, a huge figure.
Against the famous agnostic lawyer Clarence Darrow, who declared, "Scopes isn't on trial, civilization is on trial." The trial's drama peaked when Darrow cross-examined Bryan on his literal interpretation of the Bible. It was quite the scene. The satirical coverage by H.L. Mencken, who called Bryan foolish, captured the widespread feeling of a nation really grappling with its own modernity.
And this wasn't an isolated event. We also saw the rise of charismatic evangelists like Billy Sunday. He was a former baseball player who drew huge crowds. And Amy Semple McPherson, a Canadian Pentecostal preacher who skillfully blended Hollywood style and modern technology with a message of fundamentalist Christianity. Their popularity truly exemplified the decades-deep contradictions, didn't it?
It really did. While these tensions simmered, this period also saw a vibrant new generation defining American culture. Many young people, especially in cities, were experimenting with entirely new forms of social expression.
Let's talk about the new morality and the iconic flapper. Post-WWI disillusionment seemed to lead to a far more permissive atmosphere for youth. The flapper stereotype emerged. Shorter skirts, shorter hair, more makeup, drinking, smoking with boys, a complete departure from previous generations.
And beneath the surface, deeper shifts were indeed at play. Sexual mores were changing. You hear about petting parties becoming common on college campuses. The ideas of psychologists like Sigmund Freud and sexologist Havelock Ellis, who emphasized sex as a natural part of human experience, they resonated widely. Margaret Sanger's birth control campaign also empowered women with more choice, and the privacy afforded by the automobile offered, well, new spaces for young couples. Contemporary movie posters captivatingly promised brilliant men, beautiful jazz babies, champagne baths, midnight revels, petting parties in the purple dawn. I mean, quite provocative.
Definitely provocative. Along with new social expressions came new dances and, crucially, new music. Jazz. This uniquely American sound, born from African-American communities in places like New Orleans, Chicago, New York. It reached widespread popularity, even in famous venues like the Cotton Club in Harlem.
And the flapper lifestyle was also intertwined with the broader emergence of the new woman. The ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920 granted full voting rights, which was huge, and the Shepherd-Towner Act of 1921 significantly reduced infant mortality. These were tangible gains for women.
Yet it's fascinating to consider the complexities here. While Alice Paul drafted the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA, in 1923, the broader women's rights movement, having achieved some major progressive goals, actually lost considerable momentum. Is that right?
That's generally accurate, yeah. Voter participation among women declined after the initial surge, and the ERA stalled. It wouldn't pass Congress for decades. Women were increasingly entering the workforce, but often faced lower pay and the pin money stigma for married women, the idea they were just working for extras. So while social mores might have loosened, deep-seated gender inequalities persisted, leaving the new woman with a powerful yet sort of incomplete liberation.
That's a really important point.
The 1920s also witnessed the powerful emergence of the new Negro and the Harlem Renaissance. Over 500,000 African Americans participated in the Great Migration to the North, fleeing Jim Crow, segregation, and violence. New York City's Black population doubled, making Harlem this vibrant center for Afrocentric art, music, poetry, and politics.
The Harlem Renaissance, it was a true rediscovery of Black culture, wasn't it? Artists and writers rejected simply imitating white American culture. Instead, they fostered a profound sense of racial pride. You see this in Claude McKay's defiant poem, If We Must Die, or Langston Hughes, the poet laureate of the movement, who celebrated Black life in all its facets, and Zora Neale Hurston, who captured the nuances of rural Black culture in works like Their Eyes Were Watching God. Just incredible artistic output.
Incredible. And this surge of racial pride also found potent political expression in Negro nationalism. W.E.B. Du Bois, a co-founder of the NAACP and a Harvard PhD, championed Pan-Africanism, encouraging Black people globally to work together for their own interests. Marcus Garvey took this further with his Back to Africa movement. He established the Black Star Steamship Line and the United Negro Improvement Association, or UNIA, which embraced negritude, a celebration of Blackness. Despite conflicts with Du Bois and his eventual imprisonment for mail fraud and deportation, Garvey's movement left a significant legacy, inspiring later generations of Black activists.
Okay, now for one of the biggest social experiments of the decade, Prohibition. The 18th Amendment, ratified in 1919, banned the manufacture, sale, and transport of alcohol.
And its immediate failure is just a powerful insight into the limits of legislation when it clashes with public will. Instead of sobriety, you saw illegal alcohol flooding in from Canada and the Caribbean, widespread moonshine production, and a general erosion of respect for law. It backfired, really. It birthed an entirely new subculture: bootlegging, secret speakeasies, hip flasks, cocktail parties, and, crucially, organized crime. Think Scarface, Al Capone.
Right, the most famous gangster, probably.
His Chicago outfit reportedly earned over $100 million annually, often with police on his payroll. He was eventually convicted, ironically, for tax evasion, not bootlegging. Prohibition also deeply divided the Democratic Party into wets who opposed it and dries who supported it, revealing a nation split over personal liberties and morality.
This era of deep disillusionment, especially after the war, also gave us a lost generation. A group of intellectuals and writers scarred by World War I, the rise of fundamentalism, the Red Scare. They often lived as expatriates, particularly in Paris.
Their literary output is truly insightful, offering a critical lens on the times. F. Scott Fitzgerald, in The Sight of Paradise, captured a generation that had, quote, grown up to find all gods dead. His masterpiece, The Great Gatsby, didn't just depict the era's glamour, it exposed the doom that always follows the fun, fast-lived life of the modern millionaire, that hollowness beneath the surface. Ernest Hemingway, with his adventurous life and war experiences, wrote impactful novels like The Sun Also Rises and A Farewell to Arms, articulating a sense of post-war angst and disillusionment. Sinclair Lewis in Babbitt powerfully satirized middle-class conformity, and Edith Wharton in The Age of Innocence reflected on a vanished old New York society. These writers really gave voice to the profound anxieties beneath the decade's glittering surface.
Let's shift now to the political landscape, a period dominated by what became known as Republican ascendancy. The 1920s marked a clear desire for normalcy and a strong pro-business stance after the reform-minded progressive era.
Indeed, the Democratic Party was fragmented, and Americans, weary of reform and war, seemed ready for a return to normalcy, as Harding put it. The era was largely dominated by the attitude captured in Calvin Coolidge's famous statement, "The business of America is business."
Warren G. Harding, an Ohio senator, he perfectly embodied this sentiment. He promised not heroics but healing, not nostrums but normalcy, not revolution but restoration. While apparently a genial figure, the social critic H.L. Mencken famously critiqued his speeches as just rumble and bumble.
Harding's landslide victory in 1920 clearly reflected that desire for normalcy. He won big. He surrounded himself with a pro-business cabinet, including figures like Herbert Hoover as Secretary of Commerce and Andrew Mellon as Secretary of the Treasury. Mellon was a multimillionaire who believed the government is just a business and can and should be run on business principles. Very straightforward view. Harding implemented tax cuts, established the country's first formal budgeting process, and introduced the emergency tariff of 1921. He also pursued peace through disarmament conferences, which is sometimes overlooked.
However, there was a dark cloud hanging over Harding's administration, wasn't there? Corruption. While personally honest, apparently he surrounded himself with unscrupulous advisors, often dubbed his Ohio Gang. This led to widespread corruption, including the infamous Teapot Dome scandal.
Ah, yes, Teapot Dome. Secretary of the Interior Albert B. Fall secretly leased Navy oil reserves in Teapot Dome, Wyoming for bribes. He ended up going to prison for it. There was also the Veterans Bureau scandal, where Colonel Charles Forbes absconded with millions meant for veterans' hospitals. Just awful stuff. Harding's sudden death in 1923, while still in office, brought his troubled presidency to an abrupt end.
His successor, Calvin Coolidge, known affectionately as Silent Cal, inherited the presidency and immediately set about cleaning up the scandals. Walter Lippmann wrote that Mr. Coolidge's genius for inactivity is developed to a very high point. Kind of a backhanded compliment, maybe?
Maybe, but it fit the public mood. You know, there's that old anecdote about him at a dinner party.
Oh, the one where the woman bet she could get him to say more than 3 words?
That's the one. He just looked at her and replied, "You lose."
Classic Silent Cal.
It perfectly captures his quiet, almost stoic demeanor, which, coupled with his Puritan work ethic and focus on eliminating scandal, really resonated with the public at the time. His core belief was clear. The business of America is business. He strictly adhered to Mellon's fiscal policies, reducing government intervention. He famously stated, "The man who builds a factory builds a temple." That tells you a lot. Coolidge easily won the 1924 election against a divided Democratic Party, solidifying the era's pro-business political landscape.
As 1928 approached, Coolidge famously decided quite simply, "I choose not to run." His Republican heir apparent was Herbert Hoover. He ran against Democrat Alfred E. Smith. Smith was quite different, Irish, Catholic, anti-prohibition, seen as a big city politician.
But the pervasive Republican prosperity of the decade, or the perception of it, ultimately carried the day once again. Hoover won easily. As he took office, there was this widespread belief in continued economic growth, and the stock market continued its ascent. Setting the stage, of course, for the dramatic end of the decade, a potent reminder of how quickly seemingly endless prosperity can, well, evaporate.
And that brings us toward the end of our deep dive into the Roaring Twenties. It truly was a decade of incredible dichotomy, wasn't it? A period of unparalleled prosperity, dazzling technological marvels, groundbreaking cultural expression, but simultaneously intense social conservatism, nativism, and political scandal, just packed with contradictions.
Absolutely. Our journey through this deep dive has clearly shown us the profound clash between the old and the new. Rural and urban, faith and science. It was a time when American life was truly redefined. The nation was grappling with what it meant to be modern and laying foundations for many of the cultural and social debates that, continue to echo today.
So we're left with this question for you to think about. Considering the dizzying pace of change and the profound societal debates of the 1920s, from mass media's rise to intense nativist backlashes, what echoes of these transformations and conflicts do we still see shaping our world? And maybe our understanding of what it means to be modern today. We invite you to consider how these historical patterns continue to inform current events,